Hello there. Modern Horizons 2 is coming out, so I did a quick overview on my stream of all the cards that I'm excited about and all the cards that I'll probably be brewing with in future videos. Enjoy. Um, this card, the whole Evoke cycle you have to consider. Evoke for free is very powerful, especially in regards to Vengevine and different Hollow 1 variants. So in regards to the cycle, the white one is fine and may see play depending on the deck and depending on the archetype. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it'll have like super crazy dedicated decks for it, but maybe it's maybe it's a strong option for some kind of deck that plays multiple white cards. But it's really weird because like white decks typically don't really need to remove additional creatures. This thing is just a big old thing that gets pyroblasted. I think it's not very good in Vintage in my mind. It does fill a little bit of a niche against like a bug heavy metagame where bug players are playing Assassin's Trophy instead of Abrupt Decay. And you could really catch them by surprise, especially because Oko doesn't actually deal with this in the terms of getting +1/+1 counters. Overall, like, it's really embarrassing against Pyroblast, but it's pretty reasonable against a bug deck that's not playing Assassin's Trophy. So maybe you see it play as some kind of sideboard tech, maybe out of something like Doomsday, possibly. Unclear. I don't really care about this card. This is kind of Pyrokinesis, but it doesn't have Flash for whatever reason. Maybe it was balancing issues in Modern. I actually think that this is just not strong enough. I was looking at this card to see how playable the red Basking Rootwalla would be in different Hollowvine variants, and I think this card has got a little underwhelming. You definitely might see play in a more aggressive Hollowvine shell featuring like Fury of the Hordes, the red Basking Rootwalla, Pyrokinesis, and those kind of things. But I could easily see it just not seeing very much play. This is a really cool card, Endurance. It's got more of an underpowered trigger ability than some of these other cards in the set, but it also is like a pretty reasonable body at 3 mana for a 3/4. I don't think 3 mana for a 3/4 lines up particularly well in Vintage, unfortunately, as it doesn't really block Hollow One, which is kind of the biggest deal in terms of creatures. But I could definitely see it seeing play in decks that can cast it. Definitely sees sideboard play, maybe in different kind of Hollow One variants, Hogak variants, those kind of things. I think this card's probably going to see play. Sarah's Emissary is just a very niche upgrade to Blazing Archon, which actually is a card that does sometimes see play in Vintage. I know I am a proponent of playing 2 Blazing Archons in the sideboard of my combo Oath list as a better Oath target against Dredge and Shops. And this is actually an upgrade on Blazing Archon against Shops, because when you name Artifact, it actually stops the Ballista kill, which is nice. It's a kind of a minor thing, but it's a thing. This card is not as strong as some of the other ones in the cycle, but it is blue, so it pitches a force, so it probably just sees play. I don't think it's like... A lot of the times, the decks that are going to want to play this, like the Hollowvine variants, don't really care very much about a creature or a Planeswalker spell, besides something maybe like Yixid Jailer or Containment Priest. Even then, it's mostly just Yixid Jailer. So maybe you play this in the sideboard as a very reasonable answer to the Yixid Jailer, but in general, like, it's mostly going to... If it does see play, it's mostly because it's blue and pitches the forces. This card is interesting because it can be played with Luris, is the biggest reason why this card is interesting. And I mean, I'm sure Matt Murray will 5-0 with it, but I don't think it should see extensive play. Ragavan is a card that I'm very interested in playing. I'm very interested in all the cards that make treasures. After playing that one league with Magda, the Magda Wheels League, I was very impressed with the ability to make 1 treasure a turn, and I actually think that this card is pretty reasonable. It does, as Matt Murray pointed out in one of his Twitter threads, line up kind of poorly against the creatures in the format, in terms of like Dreadhorde Arcanist, Deathrite Shaman, etc. And there are a lot of whiffs depending on the deck, but I think I think that making a treasure every turn can kind of offset that. And whenever you steal something that you can actually cast, it's like a big win. I will try it out. I'm not super hopeful that it will be good in like a ton of decks, but I really like Ragavan as a card and a character, so I'm definitely gonna give it a shot. This card is interesting. I don't know about in Vintage, but maybe, I mean, I've played replenish decks in Vintage before, and they're actually pretty close to playable and relatively fun. And paying 2 mana for replenish is interesting. Unfortunately, these cards interact like very poorly with cards like Lavinia and some other cards like that. And I think that these suspend cards are just like, they're obviously geared towards modern instead of towards vintage. So I probably isn't good, but I think there's like some amount of ability to play like Shark Typhoons and the other cycling enchantments that are very large for low mana, Lake Claim, Cast Out, those kind of things. So I think there's like something that you could probably play there, but I'm not 100% sure that this is better than playing Replenish. I don't care about Merfolk. This card is the best card in the set. It's going to change Vintage probably forever. In my mind, this card is a huge upgrade in every single Bazaar deck, Dredge, Hogak, and Vine variants, and Huizar variants. Your Hogak decks are typically extremely weak to combo, and this will help you shore up those matchups. Not only does it take cards out of your combo player's hand, but it protects your hollow one. It triggers your bridges. It triggers your Vengevine. It's just a completely unreasonable card, I think, and it will probably make my life going forward very, very miserable. And if I salt out, it's in the future, next 2 weeks or so, it will most likely because I gotten beat by a Grief Vine player over and over and over again. Grief is definitely better than Unmasks because of the body. It also doesn't get Flusterstormed in comparison to Unmask, or Force of Negated in comparison to Unmask. It's a lot better than Unmask, and especially in Vine decks. This card is extremely good, and it's very also very castable inside of like Hogak Vine, which is another like subtle upside. This card is the best card in the set, and it it could make life for Vintage players a living hell in the next 2 weeks. I like this stupid dinosaur thing. I don't think it's good, but it's really cool. So we'll probably play a Wednesday night league with some kind of dinosaur deck. So be on the lookout for that. Nothing super interesting here. Thought Monitor is a card that I'm excited for. I don't think it's a super good card by any means, but it's a card that does some interesting things in conjunction with one of my favorite brews, which is the KCI deck in Vintage. Having a 7 mana artifact, which will bring back things like Scrap Trawler and KCI on Scrap Trawler triggers, is like, ooh, it's worth giving a shot to. So some people who were here earlier in the stream saw my list, but I definitely will be playing at least a league or a Wednesday night Vintage, one of the two. Maybe not a Wednesday night Vintage because those are usually pretty hostile to artifact decks. It's like a lot of mono white players who play Stony Silences. But I will at least stream a league of KCI with this deck, so definitely be on the lookout for that one. This card is very strong, this Dothy Voidwalker. Being a Leyline of the Void is very good in Vintage. Being a 3/2 unblockable is very good in Vintage. And then being able to cast your opponent's spells is also, I think, fairly strong in Vintage. Combine that with the fact that this card is going into a Luris deck almost every time. And can be rebought, and they also work well in multiples. I think this card is certainly a player that could see play. Oh boy, yeah, it's a weird one, and it might take a little while to set in, but I'm sure there will be some really sweet Matt Murray Luris decks with this card in it, and I'm definitely going to try them out because it's just a really cool card. Very, very interested in seeing this card. This card I think is not powerful enough. Anything else here? Nothing super. This card is actually like pretty good at what it does. It's actually like if you resolve this card against you resolve and stick this card against Dredge, it actually hits most of their things that matter. Almost all of their things that matter. Icarid, Prized Amalgam, Creeping Chill, etc., etc. But it's also white pips, which is just really, really hard to cast early enough, and it's probably just not worth it. This card's weird. I don't know. It could be played in a Luris deck, but I think it costs a little much. This card is interesting. I'm sure I'm going to lose to it, but I don't think it's good. I don't really see it as being the strongest choice, this Esper Sentinel. Suspend is another card that's super interesting. It plays really well with Lavinia and Teferi, but then you're already in white. I know Matt doesn't like playing Swords to Plowshare, so maybe this is an upgrade. It also works pretty favorably with Valky. So maybe you're like a 4-color blue-white control deck or something. So Suspend is a card I'll keep an eye on Matt Murray do something with, but I don't think I'm going to be the one brewing with it right away. I think this costs too much mana and requires too many lands. I don't think that the Charmar is very good. I don't care about a Jund Hierarch. This card costs too much to overload, so I don't think it's actually worth it. There's a lot of effects like this in Magic, and none of them have ever been very good. Green Yawgmoth's Will is definitely something to keep an eye on, but as I said, I don't think that these Suspend cards are meant for Vintage, and I don't think they're going to be super good in Vintage. This card, Timeless Dragon, could see play in a Standstill deck. Probably very, very good in a Standstill deck. The problem is, are Standstill decks ever very, very good? That is probably not the case. This card is actually worth mentioning. This mill card here. Each opponent mills 14. And the reason is because it cycles and mills 4, which is probably pretty reasonable as a tech to beat Doomsday. Though I don't really like that kind of effect against Doomsday. I think it's like super narrow, and my sideboard is already very compact, typically in Vintage, where you have to beat Shops and Doomsday and Dredge, and it's pretty impossible to have like these crazy, very narrow sideboard cards for one of the combo decks in the format, and it doesn't even hit all of the combo decks. At least when you have like a Shops card, it hits all of the Shops decks, and you hit a Bazaar base card, it hits all the Bazaar decks. When you have like a Doomsday base card that doesn't hit like the other combo decks in the format, I think it's kind of silly. I actually think that of the Suspend cards, the Demonic Tutor on Suspend is probably one of the more interesting ones. It does interact very favorably with Dreadhorde Arcanist, so it's something to keep an eye on, but probably not worth the effort. And anything else here? Down to multicolor real quick. This card is more of a legacy card, I think, than a Vintage card. I don't think that these like 1 mana 3 power Delver strategies are super good in Vintage, and I think Delirium is I think people are underestimating how hard it is to achieve Delirium, though things like Mishra's Bauble do help in that regard, and obviously like people are playing Deathrite Shamans in this format, which makes this card have a harder time becoming a dragon as well. So not thrilled on Dragon's Rage Channeler. I want to get down to the multicolor cards. Oh, this one actually is something I will probably do a stream of. I think Chatterstorm is interesting. It's probably not good, but the idea of doing the learn your lesson that gives all of the creatures like +1/+1 in haste for the turn, and then Chatterstorming and building a hasty Empty the Warrens sounds like a lot of fun to me. So maybe we will do that for fun. Dakin is a sweet card, but I'm not sure if it fits into Vintage at all. And having cards that based on the number of lands you control is just not exactly a vintagey strategy. As is this really cool looking Grixis Planeswalker who does some weird things with creatures being in play and stealing them. It's possible that this is playable, but it's hard to cast, and creatures aren't always the biggest deal in Vintage, but obviously in a lot of matchups they are. It'll be interesting to see. This is a Daretti that is Green Sun Zenithable and all the other things you can do with green creatures, which makes it very interesting. I think Daretti is a pretty strong card. The Daretti the Genius, the one in a black and a red one. I think Daretti is probably an underplayed card, mostly due to the colors it's in. But in certain metagames where creatures are a big deal, I think it's pretty powerful, and this card is definitely not unreasonable for that kind of metagame. So if there's a bug deck in a metagame that is like a Green Sun Zenith based bug deck that has a metagame that provides for this to be in like a good spot, then I actually think this card could be played. Definitely a reasonable choice. This card's cool, but it's obviously not very playable. Moderation is a card that Matt Murray has his eyes on. It's not a card that I would ever play. It's not exactly a fun or interesting card for me, but there are definitely kinds of Magic players who would definitely try playing this. So yeah, be on lookout for a Matt Murray list with that one in it. Not for me. This Master of the Death is insane. It's a really big upgrade again for the different Bazaar decks in the format. This is a squee that is actually blue and black. It will pitch to all of the pitch spells you want it to. I could see this being like a 4 of in the sideboard of even Bazaar, where you can like board into the controlling pitch variant. This card is just very, very good. I don't think that the 1 life matters as much as people think it does. And giving like Hazard decks, the horror 1 decks, access to another 4 squeeze, and 4 squeeze that pitch to the forces and come back to your hand to pitch to forces and to contagions and to grief and to everything. It's exiles to Icarid. This card is wild. I could definitely see it. I could actually see it seeing play in Dredge. Obviously maybe not in the main deck, but depending on like if your sideboard is the board into like a more controlling like Bazaar based control deck, this card is certainly a choice you could make. I'm not happy this card was printed either. Between Master of Death and Grief, I am very, very concerned with how Vintage will look going forward. General Rokarik is a card that I am excited to play. I think this card is super, super sweet. Pro monocolored. Whenever you cast a multicolor spell, you get a 4/4 artifact golem, and that 4/4 artifact golem is big, and it isn't easy to cast multicolor spells in Vintage, but I don't think it's like as hard as people think it is. And I think we could make something work. I don't know exactly what this will be. It might end up having to be like a humans list where everything's multicolored, which is, I think, less exciting. But if I can find like a spell-based list that uses this as like its main win con, I would be pretty interested in doing so. Being pro monocolor is very interesting in the format right now, as it will have protection from Lightning Bolt, Swords to Plowshares, Fatal Push. Obviously, it doesn't have protection from Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, or Oka, which are the bug ones. But outside of bug, like most control decks are playing like Lightning Bolt or Swords to Plowshares as their answers. Or Fatal Push as their answers. They're not really playing multicolored answers. So this is actually a very hard card to answer once it resolves. I don't know, maybe there's some kind of deck with like I don't know, Opal or Amber or what's the 4 mana red white enchantment that I love? It's the one with chapters. I can't remember. Someone in chat will say it and we'll it's Showdown of the Skulls. I think there could be something fun to do inside of like maybe red, white, blue Jeskai Scalds deck. That would be something that I would be super interested in trying. So this is actually one of the cards that is most exciting to me. I think this card is really, really cool, and it clocks really, really fast. And I think this card's sweet. I don't really think this will see play, but it's a pretty cool card. The flippy card is bad, but maybe we'll do a Wednesday night stream because it's fun. This is like a Cascade and Affinity for Artifacts is a really bad combination, so I don't think that will see play. And that should be, oh no, we have artifacts. Nope. This card is sweet. Academy Manufacturer is a sweet card, and we will definitely play with it. I don't know what we're gonna do, but there are lots of fun cards that I enjoy in Magic that makes clues, foods, or treasures. There are lots of fun cards in Magic that make food, or treasure. The problem with that is like a lot of them cost 3 mana. I'm thinking things off the top of my head like Oko, Tireless Tracker, those kind of cards. A lot of them cost 3 mana, so this might be problematic. But I want to play with this card just because it seems like sweet and fun. And I'm definitely going to try it. Void Mirror is a insanely overrated Magic card. It certainly could be useful in like a Shop's Mirror where you're more prepared or you're just on the play. But I think that if this was a prevalent sideboard card, Shop's decks can pretty easily adapt to it. I don't actually think it will be a prevalent sideboard card because I don't think it's that good. I think if anything happens, it'll be like a sideboard card for a Shop's deck that's more prepared for it and uses it as a way to cheese wins in the mirror in game 1. So the problem with like Void Mirror is a lot of the times it's going to turn off your own spells. Most decks in Vintage play some spells that don't cost mana to cast. Obviously, like it's fine against like the spells Dredge cast, but Dredge doesn't really cast very many spells anymore. Dredge is just going to beat you with Icarids and Creeping Chills. The fact that Creeping Chill is not cast is completely absurd, and it actually invalidates a lot of those kind of things. Like playing a Lavinia against Dredge just isn't really that good anymore because they'll just power through and beat you anyways. Overall, I'm pretty low on Void Mirror, but I could see people playing it being effective for a little while, and people adapting their list to make it render it less useful. Brainstorm is something that's interesting. The idea of having an extra rock in PO is looking for like an additional 2 or 3 1-mana artifacts that it can pick up that are good. So there's a possibility that Brainstorm sees play in PO for that reason. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not very good. Kind of hard to tell. It's probably even better in a deck where it plays Lurrus. The problem with playing Lurrus in a PO deck is obviously that you have to lose Tinker Citadel, and Tinker Citadel is the best part about playing a PO deck, so it's a little bit of a give and take, though. Maybe there's a list somewhere out there that plays Lurrus in this card. Tormod's Crypt Keeper, I think, is like kind of being a little slept on, but maybe it's not actually good. I think it's kind of interesting, the idea of having, if you're playing a workshop deck and you want to play a Tormod's Crypt effect, that you can play a Tormod's Crypt effect that's also a 3/2 Vigilance. Really like that idea where you can be attacking with your 3/2 and your opponent like can't really like they're kind of forced to like play into the crypt and make you sack it. Maybe that's actually not very good, and that's just an idea that I was thinking about. So overall, the set is very interesting, and there are a bunch of cards that we'll play some Sweet Brews with. But in general, I'm mostly worried about Grief and Master of Death just ruining the format. So that's what I'm mostly worried about. Yeah. I'm not saying that the Tormod's Crypt Keeper is a great answer, but I think like combined with the other cards that are in your shop stack, typically it might be reasonable. Oh, I did forget about the lands, so let's just continue the lands here. I don't think the multicolored artifact lands are going to be played, but Yavimaya will definitely be played. I think this card is a big upgrade for the different Elvish Reclaimer decks that are just on the fringes of Vintage right now. I think there's a lot of green-white depths style lists that are very good and just need some dedicated pilots. With Pullman not playing much Magic anymore, and Zeus being, kind of in and out depending on his time. The two people who like really innovate in this kind of area in Vintage are not around as much. But I think that this card is a very, very big upgrade to both green-white depths Reclaimer decks as well as Zeus Bond style Fast Bond, Bizarre Workshop hybrids, those kind of decks. This card is good. Green is a very important color type to be making off of things in a similar way to like how Riftstone Portal is in those decks. But I think this like is a little bit better in those kind of Elvish Reclaimer decks usually. Urza Saga is very good as well. Urza Saga is a very strong card. It is worth noting that this is an enchantment land and can get hit by Force of Vigor, which will absolutely ruin your day. But there's a lot of really strong interactions between this card and some of the existing shop decks. I don't think that it's going to be played in Ravager, but it could be a replacement for something in Ravager. I'm more interested. It could be played in Ravager, but I'm not as sold on that one is. I'm more sold on in things like Golos shops and combo shops. Being able to fetch this off of Golos is very, very strong. Especially because the Golos prison deck doesn't typically win very fast. I like the fact that this thing can produce 2 very large constructs to attack and win with in the following turns. So I'm very hyped for this card as a one of in Golos prison. But as Slasher has already demonstrated tonight, I think Urza Saga is really, really strong in the Leyline Helm combo shops deck. There's a lot of actually really strong interactions between things like Thespian Stage and Mirage Mirror. This might be kind of revitalizing or like at least adding a bunch of extra play to the Golos combo shops Helm Leyline deck. So I think this card is something to definitely take an eye out for. Sagas are interesting because you get the 1 counter when it comes into play. And then on your draw step, after your draw step, but before your main phase, it's like a weird timing window. I could be saying that wrong. You get this counter, and then if it has 3 counters, it will go away after. But you can still, on your second turn of having this, you can make a construct, and on your third turn in your upkeep, or with this trigger on the stack, you could also make a construct. So really, you can make 2 constructs and go search for a 0 or 1 drop with this card and put it into play. So this card is pretty strong. I think that's it, right? I think that's everybody. Somebody said something earlier, but I don't remember what card they were talking about. Let's take just a quick peek. Grief is much better than Unmask, yes. Unholy, I don't know what Unholy Heat is. Unholy Heat. What the? Alright, quit. Yeah. Like I said earlier, I think that Grief is just much better than Unmask for a bunch of reasons, including Vengevine, Force of Negation, and Flusterstorm. So yeah, that's actually a pretty overwhelming, not overwhelming, but all-encompassing set review, actually. So maybe I'll chop this up and put it on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Definitely thank you for sticking through and watching this. These are not usually my most watched videos on YouTube, but it'll be nice for people who haven't seen my go over these cards on Twitch to have access to this. And then everybody can go back and laugh at me when I'm wrong about card evaluations, which is always fun. So yeah, that was fun. I gotta have to go back and rip that from YouTube, from Twitch though. So now what I'm gonna do is send everybody over to Breba. Breba is one of the founding members of the Vintage Discord, link in chat. Has been working on becoming a doctor, so has obviously not played as much Vintage as previously did. But you're at the rare and lucky time to catch a Breba stream, so I'm gonna send you over there, and hopefully everyone has a great night.